Hi y'all, Snarky J Cosplay here with my review of episode 6, the finale of Obi Wan Kenobi. Right off the bat, I have to say that this was the best episode of the entire series, which is a relief considering how lackluster the rest of it was. I give this episode a rating of 8 out of 10. The solid mixture of drama, action, and plenty of nostalgia bait made it a solid episode, definitely worth watching. I will add that this episode is not without its flaws. It's still got some major eye-roll moments, and I'm of the opinion that one solid finale does not justify how weak the rest of the show was. But this episode is significantly more rewatchable than the rest of the series, and I really enjoyed sitting down for it this week. Now, let's get into it. We start off with an update on Riva, who is somehow still alive and has somehow made it to Tatooine, but this is Star Wars and based on the sequel trilogy, we already know that somehow is plenty of explanation. She's on Tatooine intimidating locals in hopes of finding Luke. Meanwhile, Vader is adamantly chasing the transport that Obi-Wan is on. Quite conveniently, for drama purposes, Rogan tells Obi-Wan that the ship is in bad shape. They need a way to buy time in order to repair the ship, make the jump to light speed, and escape. Looking at Leia and all the scared citizens, Obi-Wan comes to the conclusion that his way of buying time is going to be facing Vader himself. In a moment that could have been potentially impactful, Obi-Wan finally asks Haja to please promise him that he'll get Leia back to her home safely. But of course, it's Disney, so they use Haja as more comic relief that basically ruins the gravity of the moment. This is something I'm used to with this show by now. Back on Tatooine, Owen has been warned that Riva is coming for his boy. Aunt Beru stays strapped. They camp out at the family home with rifles to wait out Riva's arrival, which I actually thought was pretty cool, seeing a little bit of backbone from the Lars family. Back on the transport, as he says his goodbyes, Obi-Wan gives Leia Tala's old holster. It took me a minute to remember which rando this belonged to. God, this show was forgettable. While he's on his own, he's still reaching out to Qui-Gon, but lines like, "This ends today," are effectively meaningless because again, we all know how these stories end. So, once Obi-Wan leaves the transport in an escape craft, Vader gets in his own ship and follows him. Once he's landed and is preparing for this final face-off against his former Padawan, Obi-Wan finds Lola, the droid, hidden in his robes. And all I could think while watching him carefully place her on the dashboard of the ship was, wow, Disney is really trying to sell us this thing. After a quick display of Riva quite literally trudging her way through the sands of Tatooine, Darth Vader finally arrives. He and Obi-Wan start to duel again, and I have to say this is the best combat we've seen in the entire series. Obi-Wan is fighting like he's in his prime, and we see a lot more movement from Vader than we usually do, which is a welcome sight. In the midst of the action, they take us right out and cut back to Riva. It just feels pointless. Why and how is she alive? Why are we watching Owen and Beru unsuccessfully try and light this lady up? Luckily, that goes quickly enough, and they take us right back to the action between Obi-Wan and Vader. They seem to get tired of using lightsabers, and they start throwing rocks at each other, like kids in a plastic ball pit at Chuck E. Cheese, and Vader eventually crowns himself king of the ball pit by burying Obi-Wan Kenobi in rocks and leaving him there. It's supposed to be suspenseful, but again, we already know this isn't how Obi-Wan Kenobi dies. On Tatooine, Riva and Owen are finally facing off, and between pained, sweaty grunting and random shouts, Riva tells Owen that what she wants is justice. If the line didn't feel out of place enough, we get another sequence of a full-grown adult chasing after a 10-year-old, which literally made me laugh out loud. Back in the rock pit, Obi-Wan Kenobi finds the motivation to get himself out and go back after Vader. I liked this duel right up until the part where Obi-Wan makes every rock in the joint float, and we get into this weird ultimate snowball fight with stones. I personally just could have done without this scene. It felt a little silly. But as silly as that was, I was pulled right back into the action. Obi-Wan lands a few brilliantly placed hits. He's slashed Vader's chest module open and cut the helmet in half. This right here. Vader on his knees, half machine, half man, gasping for air and speaking with Anakin's voice, it gave me chills. And this moment where Obi-Wan tells Anakin that he's sorry, Ewan McGregor deserves all the praise in the world for that. It broke my heart. The line was so well delivered. It was so well responded to by Hayden Christensen. This was literally the highlight of the entire series. What we all knew would happen happens. Obi-Wan is forced to leave the shell of his former Padawan and friend behind. Back on Tatooine, Riva is still playing this stupid game of hide and seek with Luke. She drags him off a cliff, and the only reason she doesn't make a shish kebab out of him is because she starts remembering exactly how she felt when Anakin was committing Order 66. She eventually picks the unconscious kid up and returns him to Obi-Wan and the Lars family. And Obi-Wan basically redeems her on the basis that she did not murder a child, which is literally the easiest thing in the world to do and is probably the weakest redemption arc I've ever seen. On Mustafar, Darth Humpty Dumpty has finally been put back together again, and he's engaged in a call with none other than Palpatine. I'm of the opinion that showing Palpatine at the end of this really weak show was nostalgia bait, but it worked. I was stoked. And for the first time in the entire show, we finally get to hear the Imperial March, which feels entirely too late, but was still pretty good. After a heartfelt reunion with Leia, in which we finally get to hear the Force theme that has been completely absent from this show the whole time, Obi-Wan visits Luke on Tatooine and finally says the thing. I'm not about to say that this whole show was good just because he said hello there one time at the end of the show. I'm not doing it. It's as he's riding off into the desert to get very old very fast that the Force ghost of his old master, Qui-Gon Jinn, finally makes an appearance, and he's still being played by Liam Neeson, which was a welcome sight. And that's how the series ends. Like I said, this episode gets an 8 out of 10. I could have done without Disney's weak dialogue and corny action sequences. Plus, Riva's scenes in this episode felt predictable and completely unnecessary. I'm not gonna be nostalgia baited into giving it a perfect 10. But this was a really solid and entertaining episode. I can't say this finale justifies how awful some of this series was, and I can't say that it now makes me a fan of the series. It doesn't. Unfortunately, an incredible wrap up to a lackluster series doesn't make the rest of the show any better. But I can say this was a pretty fantastic finale, and I actually enjoyed watching it for the most part. Obi Wan Kenobi as a series gets a 5 out of 10 from me, which makes it considerably better than the Book of Boba Fett. Let's just hope Andor is even better than these two. That's all from me. I've been Snarky J. Thank you so much for watching. Please don't forget to like and subscribe, and let me know your thoughts on the finale of Obi Wan Kenobi in the comments below.